My research at Emory and Georgia Tech has shown that it's opposite. It's actually the pauses in activity is what's really important for our memory and behavior. Because what we found is that when we start to be quiet, that makes it necessary for forming new memories. So this is what's been discovered recently and what was published in Nature back in April of this year.
Wow, that's really fascinating. When we pause, that's when the brain is most active. Is that why we need to rest?
So that's a great example.
It's great to have you here, Dr. Nuri Jeong. 정누리 박사님 is a neuroscientist specializing in goal-oriented learning and memory. She created See, Think, Act neuroscience-based workshop. Thank you for being here, Dr. Jeong.
Thank you, Min, for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
As I was preparing for this interview, I'm like, what do I even ask? I don't know anything about neuroscience. Why don't we start there? Can you break down neuroscience so that a 10-year-old could understand?
Neuroscience is the study of how the brain might think, behave, and make sense about the world that we live in. And so thinking about how do we set goals? How do we get to our goals? How do we interact with others? How do we remember things? Why are we the same personality that we are? All those questions that are really interesting and looked at from the perspective of how does the brain process all these information and then brings it out to the world.
I could imagine when people hear Nuri, she's a neuroscientist. Do people, like outside of your community, do people go, oh, wow, okay, good. And then do they walk away because they don't know what to say?
I think there's a lot of perception that people think that scientists, especially neuroscientists, are like so smart and you can't approach them. But I'm trying not to, show that at all because there's no clear, correlation between intelligence and the ability to study some concepts that relate to neuroscience. Some of the things that people mention is like, am I a neurologist? People immediately go, like, do I do like brain surgeries and things? But I'm also very excited that, I get to be the one to talk about how neuroscience is so relatable and something that can be understood by everyday people.
How did you get into neuroscience? Why neuroscience?
Great question. I think I actually fell into my lab is always what I start with because, the brain is so awesome. It's just the most amazing 3-pound organ in the body. But what got me interested in neuroscience as a field, as a study, was I worked in the lab at Columbia after I graduated from undergrad. And I had the opportunity to study how the dopamine system works in the context of schizophrenia and especially a motivation. How do we stay motivated, right? And what was really fascinating to me is that I was measuring the real-time dopamine release in the mouse brain while they are moving around and performing tasks and doing these amazing work. And you can actually correlate that, what's happening in the brain directly to what's happening in the real life. And I was like, wow, the fact that it's possible is amazing. You can see the immediate response to dopamine levels going up and down when the mouse is eating cookies. And so I got hooked into that. And then grad school, thinking about how do we form memories that are important for our goals? Because I think that's kind of the fundamental part of how do we learn anything new, right? And then two, if we can find a way to treat neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. My family members have been affected by the disease, and I know a lot of people are affected by that. And how can we use that information to treat diseases for learning disability or other neuro disorders that affect memory and learning?
So what is the most exciting thing that your field have discovered regarding learning and memory?
I would love to talk about my work. That's one of my favorite topics in my life. So, the way that people have been thinking about how the brain works is that, when something is remembered or something is functional, the brain is actually active. But my research at Emory and Georgia Tech has shown that it's opposite. It's actually the pauses in activity is what's really important for our memory and behavior. Because what we found is that it's when we start to become quiet that makes it necessary for forming new memories. Yeah, so this is what's been discovered recently and what was published in Nature back in April of this year.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's really fascinating. When we pause, that's when the brain is most active. Wow, that's really fascinating. Is that why
Yeah,
we need
yeah.
to rest?
So that's a great example. So a year before I graduated, I was run over by a SUV, and I had a my leg was shattered, and I had to get surgery and hospitalized. Couldn't move for several months.
Mhm.
Never broken a bone in my life. Never been hospitalized. I've always been healthy. And this event really set me back, in the business time of my career. And so most people would think that this is such a negative setback because I was delayed, right? The dissertation writing, the PhD writing. And even though it was painful and was sometimes stressful, what made me realize is that this pause in career really helped me focus on what's truly meaningful to me and set me on a path to entrepreneurship. And
Mm.
so I was no longer thinking about solely just career, having a good life, job life, but thinking about my personal joy, my personal time with my family members, my relationships, to take care of my health, something that I hadn't been considering for so long, that it's been kind of put back in the
Yeah.
back of my mind while you're focused on something as important at the time I thought as my PhD project. But if that's the only thing that you're focused on and nothing else at the cost of everything else in your life, then that might be really difficult to find satisfaction and joy in every day. It's a perfect analogy because what most people think a pause in a career, a pause in some activity, some action, I'm doing something,
Mhm.
is actually a negative thing. But actually, that's what gets us to focus. It puts all our resources, our attention, which is really limited, into something that's truly meaningful and that's most important.
Wow. I could understand that part emotionally. Because we do take vacations, we go on retreats, we rest and we shut down and have a self-care time, all those things, right? They're
Mhm.
considered a pause or a rest. Okay, so I understand that emotionally. How does the brain work?
So what I didn't mention is that I was studying a specific part of a brain region that's important for learning and memory. But within that region, called hippocampus, the memory center, there are in big ways two separate types of neurons, the brain cells. One is what gets excited, and the other is what suppresses the activity of other neurons. And so this inhibitory, the suppressive kind, is the one that I focus because these are the neurons that are really important in so many different types of diseases like Alzheimer's. But what we found is that these neurons, these suppressive type, get quiet. They don't get too active at particular locations. So, for example, if a mouse realizes that when you go here, this is where we can get food, they remember that. The neurons get quiet at that particular location, and then that's what's required for that mouse to remember and to go back to it. So just remember, like, if you go to a new city for vacation
Hmm.
and, this restaurant was so awesome, like I want to come back to it, right? How do you remember that in the brain? That's what's happening. The inner neurons, the inhibitory neurons in the brain are actually becoming quiet at that location so that you can remember it. Like all our mental focus energy is onto that particular information that we want to remember.
That's really interesting. That's really fascinating. So it does make sense when people say, "Okay, take rest, quiet down, and turn everything off." That makes sense, right? Because that's when our brain works to create this space.
Exactly. And that finding that little space is so critical because we are giving us the time and the kindness that we need to reevaluate our priorities. Most people
Hmm.
just go through life without thinking about, am I focused on the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And sometimes, when we just kind of take a step back and pause and think about the full picture, like what is the impact that we're trying to create here and how can I get there? It's fascinating how there's a number of experimental studies that I can talk about and talk about why it's so important to see the bigger picture and set a goal that's ahead of you so that the brain can figure out how to get there in the best and most efficient way possible.
Is it natural for a brain to figure that out, or is it something that because emotionally, I feel like I have to be in that place of pause and think about, okay, what is important to me? How do I want to impact? But is it a natural phenomenon in the brain?
So I studied this exact thing in the context of navigation, spatial
Mm.
navigation. So how do we find our way to from A to B, right? And right now we are using so much of the GPS, but the brain is naturally able to do this. Figure out how to create a map, the entire map of where we are in space, and
Mm.
then figure out how to get to the right location in the most efficient way. And so the more we practice how do we do that naturally, and the less we rely on the GPS, we'll probably be more better at navigating different routes and coming up with better ways to get there. But one thing that is interesting is when we have a specific goal, the destination that we have in set in mind, no matter how far it is, the brain is always going to go to that direction. So it can help with the directionality. So instead of going away from that, like the wrong way,
Yeah.
we're always thinking about ways to get to that way. So even if you don't know exactly where you're headed in your life,
Yeah.
and I talk to a lot of people who are in their early career, early stage, their career, and students who tell me they're so scared if they're making the right decision as far as their majors, their
Mhm.
first job titles, and all of that. And I always tell them, job titles are something to be obsessed over because in the next 5 years, 50% of the jobs as we know are going to disappear. And AI is going to completely change the way we live and work. And that's one of the reasons why we can't just obsess over the titles, except, especially. Instead, what we should do is what kind of impact would I like to make? And that's the bigger goal, and that's the direction that we are headed. And then we can figure out the nitty-gritty details of the plans, of the methods to find the way to get there. The reason why I started the Goals Unhindered is because I want people to be empowered in how much control they have in their own life and be able to plan things out. I think motivation is starts with being able to see what you want, and then that generates the almost an incentive, like the emotional incentive for you to start heading towards that.
What if your brain is not as functional as or good engine as other people's brains? People talk about IQs all the time, right? If I have
Mm,
a 56 IQ and somebody, my next door neighbor has 156 IQ, would this work? I mean, is it same engine?
First of all, IQ is not the measurement that people should focus on. It really is irrelevant in terms of being able to achieve what we want. It has nothing to do with the intelligence, nothing to do with our creativity, nothing to do with the way we can compare ourselves to another person who may be superior, quote unquote. Because the way the study is designed, the average is 100. So if you look at from 10, 20, 30 years ago, the IQ levels, like the person with a level of 100, and compare that to today's person with an IQ of 100, it's massively different. What makes somebody a better with a better brain? I think that needs to be defined a little bit. I think what's really important in the day of artificial intelligence now is the ability to think and see something that other people might not. Because when you can see something, you can start to think about how we can get to that idealized image, and then we can create options and strategize. We can plan ahead. Whereas if you can't even see something and we're just receiving whatever the output that ChatGPT gives you, and we're relying on it, then we're almost losing the rights to our own ability to think and question. And I think that's where it becomes a difficult thing for living with AI. But the human creativity is something that I believe can be trained, can be taught, and can be harnessed because everybody has a very unique perspective that they can look at the same problem in a very different light and then come up with a very different type of solution that other people might not have. No matter how much we think that we are not enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not whatever enough, there's always a unique perspective that we can own. It's something that you always gonna have that only you can do, and only you can think. So yeah, I'm all for people who are taking their own path and creating their path their own.
It's really encouraging.
Absolutely. I think we kind of just to add a little bit, a lot of people think that, there's a specific learning styles and there's a kind of a level to the ability. Like we're trying to measure always like the child's capability or the intelligence, or like we're trying to quantify that. And there's the almost an obsession or diagnosing our kid to or categorizing our kid to be a certain a box. And all we can do is help the child to realize what they own and really own it. Really, really take ownership of their own life and their path and their actions and be beautiful in their own element.
That's so true. Thank you for saying that. Well, talking about not being enough or feeling like not being enough, right? Growing up in America, you moved here as a teenager by yourself. You're like 유학생? So did that impact you in any way? Have you ever struggled with that
Mm,
feeling?
I don't think nobody could be saying I've never had a problem, never struggled. For me, my first year of the US experience, I was 15. I hadn't turned 16, sweet 16 yet. Family has never been to the US, has actually never been abroad before me. And so, yeah, it was actually my second flight that I ever taken. The first one was to Jeju Island from my city. And then the second
My
one was like an
goodness.
18-hour flight to the US. I know. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't have anybody. I was lucky enough to meet people who were my host mom, my friends that I got to meet, the mentors that I got to connect with over the years. I am very grateful that I was given those people in my place. And I think one of the biggest challenges I had was the identity crisis that some people may have gone through,
Mhm.
especially as an international student, and especially when you're coming as a teenager. You've had half of your life at the time. Obviously I was Korean, and then now I've spent almost equally half my time in the U.S. and as well as Korea. I think that's the idea of identity has been evolving over the years, realizing, not fitting in anywhere, being in the US, being the one of the only people from Korea in my school, but going back to Korea the year after and realizing, wow, the system is very different. The way people think about, live, go about their ways is a bit different. And where am I going to give myself the best opportunity, the best chance at succeeding and doing something that I want to do. So the identity crisis was different because I didn't feel like I was Korean enough, but also
Mm.
wasn't American enough.
Mhm.
And then now I would question like, what is even American? Like, when do you become a Korean American, right? And so now I realized I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to be my own person. It doesn't have to be a particular box that I have to fit in. Some people even talk about the concept of third culture,
Mhm.
this culture that's separate from like, where you're born in versus where you're living now. But now it's a whole another separate third culture. But I think, if I may, the reason why people like are obsessed over these titles and these terms and concepts is because the need to categorize ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we could just not label ourselves as particularly Korean, American, Asian, whatever, woman, right? All these things, maybe we could be more free from the expectations that society expects us to be
Mhm.
like. And maybe we can be our own person and be more creative in what we could be and really fully utilize our own potential.
What goes through a 15-year-old mind when you decide to come to the US by yourself?
I was really excited. Honestly, I was very, very excited. My first year, I think I was just so excited how lucky I was. That sort of openness really opened my eyes to what I could be, as opposed to, oh, I'm good at English and I'm good at history, so let's go into 문과, not 이과.
The world of neuroscience, thank you for making that decision. Let's talk a little bit about your work that you're currently doing, your business, See, Think, Act workshop. What is that? Tell us.
Yeah, so I'm really excited because I mean, one of the things I was frustrated by in PhD is how slow the progress is as far as getting the knowledge that's very new and fresh into the public world, right? How can I get this new insight into day-to-day people and get them to, utilize? I mean, like when you think about it, a lot of the research is funded by public tax money. So those people should have access to all those things. But the way academic writing is, it's very hard to understand the okay, so what can I do with that kind of information, right? And
Mhm.
so I wanted to choose a path where I could help translate that tough science into something more practical and tips. And See Think Act is actually, it kind of stemmed from, the importance of understanding different people's perspectives because we want to make it more accessible. For example, if we're talking about scientific project, how can I increase my own impact with my project is through understanding how the general public or the funding committee or the investor potentially is looking at your project and then being able to reframe it in a way that makes sense to the audience. And so that was one of the first things I've done is creating a workshops to help scientists and PhD postdoc level scientists to learn how to reframe what they've been working on, because most people are just only in their project, and those details only the academic community would care about, and not communicated in a way that makes sense to the rest of us.
Yeah, yeah.
So helping them translate that research was one thing. But going forward, what I turned in is, okay, well, there's so many people who are also doing business, like entrepreneurs, for example, small business owners. We all care about, contextualizing our product and storytelling our product so that it makes sense to our customers, our clients. That's a very different question that you're asking about the direction of the company overarching goals, not just how can we make it AI powered? These features that use AI so that we can be the rest, competitive like rest of us. I think there's a lot of opportunities with AI and what capability it provides, but we should always think about what is the overarching goal, what is the problem we're trying to solve, what business are we in, and then start to think about, okay, how do we get there in the most strategic way?
Yeah, it's a big process. Just say that the most important thing in the beginning is asking the right question.
So I think the first thing is the perception, understanding that that's why the C starts first, is because we have to understand that there are different ways of looking at the same problem. Without that underlying understanding and without understanding how other people see the same problem, even if we're asking the right questions, you might not really understand their priorities, their goals, and whether we align on that.
I'm listening to you and thinking about my podcast here and trying to plug in my ideas of see, think, and act. I'm realizing I'm only really thinking about my own perspective and how I see this, but I also need to consider how others might view or perceive this channel, right? Is that how I could apply?
Yes,
Mhm.
that's exactly.
Everybody's talking about storytelling these days. And I'm thinking in terms of emotions and psychology that the stories really impact us more deeply and make that connection to the storyteller and myself. Is that how it works in the brain as well?
People know that stories are really easily remembered.
Mm.
Um, and I think there are four big reasons why somebody might remember your story. One is because it's so unexpected and it's new, it's fresh. The second thing is because obviously it just stands out. Keeping attention is really important. Third thing is about emotional, like it engages our emotions deeply because it creates a turmoil or it creates a really deep desires
Mm.
that makes us really remember whatever the thing that we're looking at. The final thing is how relevant is it to my goal, right? And this is how we frame it in a way that we're really speaking to the customer's desires and deep needs and what their goals are. And so we focus on that versus something that nobody will care about.
My mind is getting dull. Cannot remember things, cannot think of words, couldn't figure out numbers, things like that.
A lot of people get worried that whether they can't remember where they put their car keys or, we walk into a room like, I don't know what I came here for. Like
Mhm.
when you remember, like when you forget to do things or forget the names of the people or what have you, they're worried that they have, like, is this the early signs of Alzheimer's or
Right?
dementia, right? But those things, noticing those things is important because, first of all, you should definitely get tested, to get the right medical advice for it. But second, may not be anything to do with neurodegeneration that's happening in your brain. It's more like lack of attention that you are able to pay attention to the things that you actually want to remember. So, for example, the notifications that we always get from our
Mhm.
phone, from emails, there's just so many things to pay attention to that grab our attention, right? And our attention is so, segregated and distracted that we are not able to focus our full energy and attention and resources on the right things. There's somebody who mentioned, I think it might have been Mel Robbins. She mentioned that she had a great idea. It's like, if you're trying to remember something really, really important, like, car keys, like actually create like literally put a really crazy emojis in your head, like as you're dropping it on a table, like,
Huh.
bam, there's a fire,
Oh, I see.
right? Like thinking about the imagery of things that, it's
Mm.
just so out of the blue that you can actually remember. You make it very different to captures your attention. And so there's certain things that you can do, certain tricks. But I think ultimately what's really important is well, first of all, you have to know what priorities are, right? And putting the time that is prioritizing your time for the type of information that you want to remember, your family's details, like plans or your projects, absolutely prioritizing and shutting off all the screen, notifications near the time that you're trying to have this conversation, for example. And then the second and third is really boring advice, but good sleep and exercise and diet. I mean, these are things that like, I can't tell you how many people are like disappointed. You gotta sleep
Really?
well. It's one of those things that, if there's a such thing as a pill for everything, every disease is sleep. And not just any sleep, but a good quality sleep every
Mm-hmm.
night. Because without that and the right with nutrients in the brain and the body, it's hard to generate the energy that you need for the things that you care about. So yeah, for definitely the boring advice is the healthy
Yeah.
lifestyles and sleep, like diet, exercise, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Managing our stress is another thing. Stress is, something that it's hard to see by eye, and so people
Mm,
don't realize how much it's affecting us.
mm,
But mentally, physically, stress is definitely affecting a lot of our lives. And so now we're just starting to see how tremendous impact that it has on our brain functions. And so knowing how to either minimize, manage stress levels in your life is so important. Prevent it if possible. But if it's not possible, to at least manage it with daily activities like meditation. People talk about breathing, yoga, and sort of that thing. But also keeping the mind sharp, I think, besides the having the right nutrients, the right resources, and being able to prioritize your time for it, is I think also doing something creative.
mm.
And I like to, full disclosure, I don't have, like, I'm not prioritizing enough time to do this myself, but I like to do like arts and crafts work. And so if you can see in the back of
Mhm.
my room, there's like hexagons that,
Uh-huh.
my partner and I actually painted those hexagons. And I make those little mini houses to fit into this hexagon
Wow.
wood and shells. And it's a lot of therapeutic space for me, keeping a space for your mind to kind of rest, pause,
Mhm.
and stay creative and curious is really important.
Yeah. So Dr. Nuri Jeong, neuroscientist, recommends being creative to manage stress. What is your company called? You didn't mention.
Goals unhindered.
So it's a coaching consulting company, correct?
Correct. It's a corporate training and coaching company, especially for teams and leaders who want to reclaim part of $4 trillion that we may be missing out on every year because of underutilized data. So we help you turn data into actual value that you can make money off of.
If you were download one skill like, in your
Hmm.
brain, what would it be and why?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that I would love to do is, thinking about going back to creativity is connecting the dots between things that are unlikely paired. Something where their connections are not clear
Mm,
and obvious. I would love to connect the dots more efficiently. And I think that would be a really critical skills for any creative thoughts and ideas. Being able to go across disciplines and majors and ways of thinking and being able to create some new connections out of it,
yeah.
these emergent commonalities, I think that's really important. So how can we be ourselves, true independent people of creativity in our element, in our essence, but also coexist with all these other different types of people? We need to be able to learn how we can connect to people. Being able to connect the dot between people, between ideas, between objects is what gets us problem solvers.
I love that you are able to break it down for us of the neuroscience and the brain, how our brain works and how it impacts our lives. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you so much, Lynn.